The air hangs heavy with the scent of iron and terror. Dust kicked up by tens of thousands of desperate, dying men chokes the sun, casting a ghastly twilight over the battlefield. From a low hill, a lone general watches the culmination of his masterpiece. His army, a crescent of Gallic and Spanish steel, has bent, buckled, and then snapped shut like a jaw around its prey. It is not a battle, it is an extermination. The disciplined legions, the pride of the world's most formidable republic, are being systematically annihilated, their standards toppling one by one into the blood-soaked soil. The stakes of this single, sun-scorched afternoon are almost incomprehensible. This is not merely an army being destroyed, it is the very heart of Roman military power being ripped out. 8 legions, a force of unprecedented size, are trapped. If they fall, the road to the city of Rome itself lies open, vulnerable. The very concept of the Republic, its laws, its gods, its destiny to rule the world, is teetering on the edge of a bloody abyss. The whispers in the Senate, the fears of the common man, all manifest in this perfect, horrifying trap. The architect of this slaughter is not a Roman. He is the other, the specter from across the sea, a man raised from childhood on a diet of pure, unadulterated hatred for Rome. He is a commander whose genius is so profound, it seems almost supernatural. He led his army, complete with colossal war elephants, across impassable mountain ranges in the dead of winter, a feat that belongs more to myth than to military history. Now he stands calmly, watching his brilliant, impossible plan unfold with the chilling precision of a master artisan. Who is this man, this foreign demon who could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight the greatest military machine the world had ever known? What is this place, this field of utter despair whose name would be spoken in hushed, fearful tones in Rome for generations to come, a byword for ultimate catastrophe? How could a single mind conjure such a perfect vision of destruction and bring the eternal city to its very knees? The general is Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar, the sworn enemy of Rome. The battlefield is Cannae. In this moment of sublime and terrible victory, the fate of Western civilization hangs by a single, fragile thread. The Carthaginian triumph is absolute. But history is not forged in a single victory, no matter how decisive. It is forged in the long, grueling war that follows, and the story of what happened next would not be one of Carthage's rise, but of its utter, haunting annihilation. To understand the shadow of Cannae, we must travel back to a time before Hannibal, before the blood oath. We must look to the waters of the Mediterranean, a sea that was once a Carthaginian lake. Carthage, the great city on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, was a titan of trade and naval power. Its fleets were unrivaled, its merchants wealthy, its empire stretching across North Africa, Spain, and the islands of the sea. They were the heirs of the Phoenicians, masters of the waves. Opposite them was Rome, a burgeoning power on the Italian peninsula. The Romans were a people of the land. They were farmers, soldiers, engineers. Their strength was in the discipline of their legions, their mastery of siege warfare, and an unyielding will to conquer. They looked at the sea not as a highway for commerce, but as a barrier. For a time, these two powers, the wolf of the land and the shark of the sea, coexisted in a tense, watchful peace, their spheres of influence neatly divided. The breaking point was Sicily. The island, a jewel of the Mediterranean, lay directly between them, a prize too rich to be ignored. Conflict erupted in 264 BC, a clash of civilizations that would become known as the First Punic War. Carthage, with its mighty navy, felt secure. How could this land-based power challenge them on their own domain? They vastly underestimated the Romans' most dangerous quality, their relentless, brutal adaptability. Rome knew it could not win without a navy. So in an astonishing feat of industrial and military resolve, they built one. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme and reverse-engineered it, building over 100 ships in a matter of months. But they were not natural sailors. Their solution was typically Roman: turn a sea battle into a land battle. They invented a device of brutal genius called the corvus, a large, spiked boarding bridge that could be dropped onto an enemy vessel, locking the ships together and allowing their superior legionaries to swarm across. The First Punic War was a long, grinding, and horrifically costly conflict that raged for over 2 decades. Hundreds of thousands of men and hundreds of ships were lost to battle and storms. In the end, Rome's stubborn refusal to quit its seemingly endless well of manpower and the effectiveness of the corvus won the day. Carthage was defeated, stripped of Sicily, and forced to pay a massive indemnity. The peace was a humiliation, a wound that would fester in the heart of Carthage. It was in this atmosphere of defeat and bitterness that a legend was born. The great Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, who had fought valiantly in Sicily, supposedly led his 9-year-old son to a sacred altar. There he made the boy Hannibal place his hand upon the sacrificial offering and swear an oath that as long as he lived, he would never be a friend of Rome. This story, whether literally true or not, captures the spirit of vengeance that would define the next generation. Hannibal inherited not only his father's command in Spain, but also his deep, burning hatred. He was more than a mere soldier. He was a strategic prodigy, a charismatic leader, and a man possessed by a singular, all-consuming purpose: the destruction of Rome. He spent years consolidating Carthaginian power in Spain, forging a hardened, veteran army loyal to him and him alone. He was not just preparing for war, he was preparing for an apocalypse. In 218 BC, he made his move. He did not plan to fight Rome on the sea, nor would he wait for them in Spain. He would do the unthinkable. He would take the war to their doorstep. He gathered his army, a diverse force of Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, and Gauls, and began a march that still beggars belief. He would lead them along with 36 war elephants from Spain over the Pyrenees, across the Rhone River, and then, most impossibly, over the snow-covered peaks of the Alps. The crossing of the Alps is one of history's greatest epics of human endurance. It was a nightmare of blizzards, avalanches, ambushes from hostile mountain tribes, and starvation. Thousands of men and nearly all the precious elephants perished. But Hannibal pushed on, his will of iron dragging his battered army through the frozen. When he finally descended into the plains of Italy, his force was severely depleted, but it was now a core of battle-hardened survivors, fanatically devoted to their commander. Rome was stunned. They had expected to fight a war in Spain and Africa, but the enemy was now in their own backyard. They sent consul after consul, legion after legion, to crush this audacious invader. And one by one, Hannibal destroyed them. At the Battle of the Trebia, he used the freezing cold river and a hidden ambush to inflict a devastating defeat. At Lake Trasimene, he used a misty morning and the terrain to trap and annihilate an entire consular army, a catastrophe of shocking proportions. Hannibal's genius was in his ability to read his opponents, to understand their psychology. He knew the Roman commanders were often arrogant, impulsive politicians eager for glory. He exploited this weakness time and again, luring them into perfectly laid traps. His victories sent waves of panic through Rome. Allies began to waver, questioning their loyalty to a republic that seemed incapable of protecting them from this unstoppable force. In the face of this crisis, Rome turned to a man named Quintus Fabius Maximus. Appointed dictator, Fabius understood a truth that his predecessors had not. Hannibal could not be beaten in a head-on battle. He was simply too good. So Fabius devised a new, deeply unpopular strategy. He would not fight. Instead, his army would shadow Hannibal's, cutting off his foragers, harassing his supply lines, and refusing to be drawn into a pitched battle. This became known as the Fabian strategy, a war of attrition. While strategically sound, this was anathema to the Roman psyche. They called Fabius Cunctator, the delayer, a title meant as an insult. They craved a decisive victory to restore their honor. The political pressure mounted until Fabius's term expired. New consuls were elected, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, men who promised the Senate and the people of Rome what they wanted to hear, an end to the delaying and a final, glorious battle to crush Hannibal once and for all. They assembled the largest army Rome had ever put into the field, some 86,000 men, and marched to confront Hannibal near a small supply depot called Cannae. Hannibal's army was outnumbered almost 2-1. Any other general would have retreated or sought favorable terrain. Hannibal saw an opportunity for the masterstroke he had been planning his entire life. He chose the battlefield, an open plain perfect for his superior cavalry, and arranged his forces for a battle of sublime deception. He placed his weakest troops, his Gallic and Spanish infantry, in the center, allowing them to bulge forward in a crescent shape. On the flanks, he positioned his elite African infantry and his formidable cavalry. As the massive Roman legions advanced, they pushed the weak Carthaginian center back, just as Hannibal had planned. The Roman commanders saw the center collapsing and pushed their reserves in, sensing victory. They were not breaking the Carthaginian line, they were walking deeper and deeper into a trap. Then the trap sprang. The Carthaginian cavalry, having routed their Roman counterparts on the wings, swept around to attack the legions from behind. At the same time, the elite African infantry on the flanks, who had held their position, turned inward, striking the compressed Roman formations from the sides. The crescent had inverted. The Roman army was now completely surrounded, packed so tightly they could barely lift their arms to fight. The slaughter that followed was unimaginable. By the end of the day, as many as 70,000 Romans were dead or captured. It was a military annihilation on a scale rarely seen in history. One of the consuls, Paulus, was killed, along with 80 senators who had been serving as officers. The road to Rome was, for all intents and purposes, wide open. Hannibal's officers, jubilant, urged him to march on the city immediately. "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal," one of them famously said, "but you do not know how to use one." This is the great mystery of the Punic Wars, a question that has haunted historians for 2 millennia. Why did Hannibal not march on Rome? He was only a few days' march away from a city stripped of its defenders and paralyzed by terror. Perhaps he lacked the proper siege equipment to breach its formidable walls. Perhaps his army, exhausted from the battle, was in no condition for a major siege. Or perhaps he never intended to destroy the city itself, but rather to shatter its network of alliances and dismantle its republic piece by piece. Whatever the reason, the moment passed. Hannibal's hesitation gave Rome the one thing it needed: time. And in that time, the true character of the Roman Republic revealed itself. They did not sue for peace. They did not surrender. They mourned their dead, but they refused to despair. They forbade public displays of grief, enlisted slaves and boys into new legions, and melted down temple treasures to forge new weapons. In its darkest hour, Rome's resolve did not break, it hardened into obsidian. The war in Italy descended into a long, brutal stalemate. Hannibal, without the resources to lay siege to major cities and with his army living off the land, could roam the countryside at will, but he could not land a killing blow. Rome, guided by the cautious strategy of Fabius, avoided another pitched battle at all costs, slowly, methodically bottling Hannibal up in southern Italy and retaking allied cities that had defected to his cause. While Hannibal was trapped in his own victory in Italy, a new Roman star was rising in Spain. A young man named Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio's father and uncle had been killed fighting Carthaginian forces in Spain. He had himself survived the disaster at Cannae. He was a man who had seen Roman power humbled, but unlike others, he did not just fear Hannibal, he studied him. He learned his enemy's tactics of deception, ambush, and combined arms. Given command in Spain at a remarkably young age, Scipio achieved a series of stunning successes. He captured the main Carthaginian base of New Carthage in a brilliant surprise attack and defeated Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, in several key battles. He was charismatic, innovative, and like Hannibal, a master of military psychology. He was forging a new Roman army in his own image, one that could fight with the same flexibility and cunning as their great adversary. After securing Spain and cutting off Hannibal's main source of reinforcement and supply, Scipio returned to Rome a hero. He proposed a daring, audacious plan, one that horrified the older, more cautious senators like Fabius. He did not want to keep fighting Hannibal in Italy. He wanted to do what Hannibal had done to them. He wanted to take the war to Carthage's doorstep. He would lead an invasion of North Africa. The plan was a massive gamble. It meant leaving Hannibal's undefeated army still on Italian soil. But Scipio argued that the only way to get Hannibal out of Italy was to threaten Carthage itself. After much debate, he was given the command. In 204 BC, a Roman army landed in Africa for the first time in the war. Scipio, using the same tactics of speed and deception he had learned from his nemesis, won a series of victories against Carthaginian and Numidian forces. The panic in Carthage was immense. They had grown comfortable with the war being fought far away. Now a Roman army was burning its way across their homeland. The Carthaginian Senate had no choice. They sent a message to Italy, a message Hannibal must have both dreaded and expected for 15 long years. He was to abandon his campaign in Italy and return home to defend the city. The great invader was finally being called back. So it was that in 202 BC, on the plains of Zama, the two greatest generals of the age finally met face to face. It was a confrontation for the ages. Hannibal, the aging master, with a hastily assembled army of raw recruits mixed with his hardened Italian veterans. Scipio, the young challenger, leading a well-trained, confident Roman force, bolstered by the crucial Numidian cavalry who had defected to his side. The fate of the Mediterranean world would be decided by this single battle. Hannibal began the battle with his favorite shock weapon, his war elephants. He unleashed some 80 of the beasts, hoping to smash and terrorize the Roman lines. But Scipio was prepared. He had studied this tactic. He arranged his infantry in columns, not solid lines, leaving wide lanes through which the elephants could pass. As the animals charged, Roman trumpets blared, startling them, and skirmishers goaded them down the corridors, where they passed harmlessly through the army's ranks or turned back in panic into Hannibal's own lines. With the elephant charge neutralized, the main battle was joined. The infantry lines crashed together in a brutal, grinding fight. For a time, Hannibal's veterans seemed to be gaining the upper hand. But the decisive factor, just as it had been for Hannibal at Cannae, was the cavalry. Scipio's superior Roman and Numidian cavalry, led by the Numidian king Massinissa, drove the Carthaginian horsemen from the field, and then, in a perfectly timed maneuver, wheeled around and crashed into the rear of Hannibal's infantry. It was Cannae in reverse. Hannibal's army, attacked from both front and rear, collapsed. The battle was a decisive Roman victory. For the first time in his long and storied career, Hannibal had been comprehensively defeated in a major engagement. The Second Punic War was over. Carthage was forced to accept a peace treaty so harsh it effectively ended its status as a major power. It lost all its overseas territories, its navy was reduced to a handful of ships, and it was forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. Hannibal himself survived the battle and lived for nearly 2 more decades, a hunted exile. He served other Eastern kings, always trying to stir up new coalitions against his hated enemy, but his time had passed. Roman agents pursued him relentlessly across the Mediterranean. Finally cornered in Bithynia, the old general, now 70 years old, chose to take his own life by drinking poison rather than suffer the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome in a triumph. His last words were said to be, "Let us now put an end to the great anxiety of the Romans, who have thought it too long and too tedious to wait for the death of a hated old man." For half a century, an uneasy peace settled over the Mediterranean. Rome's power grew exponentially. It conquered Greece, Macedonia, and parts of Asia Minor, becoming the undisputed master of the sea and its surrounding lands. Carthage, though stripped of its empire, began to recover economically. Its location made it a natural hub for trade, and the city's commercial spirit was resilient. It rebuilt its wealth, paid off its war indemnity to Rome, and experienced a period of renewed prosperity. This recovery, however, was viewed in Rome not with admiration, but with a deep, paranoid suspicion. The ghost of Hannibal still loomed large in the Roman psyche. The trauma of Cannae had left a permanent scar. A generation of Romans had grown up with the terrifying phrase, Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal is at the gates, used to frighten children. They could not abide the thought of their old rival regaining even a fraction of its former strength. This fear was personified by one man, Marcus Porcius Cato, a powerful and influential senator known as Cato the Elder. Cato had fought in the Second Punic War and harbored an obsessive, unyielding hatred for Carthage. After a diplomatic visit to the city, where he was shocked by its renewed wealth, he became convinced that Carthage remained an existential threat to Rome. He ended every speech he gave in the Senate, regardless of the topic, with the same chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. Cato's relentless fear-mongering eventually wore down the Senate. Rome began looking for a pretext, any excuse, to finish the job once and for all. They found it when Carthage, provoked by repeated raids from its aggressive neighbor, Numidia, a Roman ally, finally raised an army to defend itself. This was a technical violation of the peace treaty. It was the excuse Rome had been waiting for. In 149 BC, Rome declared war, launching the Third Punic War. This was not a war between equals. It was a superpower moving to extinguish a weakened, third-rate state. The Carthaginians, horrified, tried to appease the Romans. They surrendered hundreds of hostages and all of their weapons. They complied with every demand. But then came the final, brutal ultimatum from the Roman consul. The city of Carthage was to be abandoned. Its entire population had to move at least 10 miles inland. The city itself would be leveled to the ground. For the people of Carthage, this was a death sentence. Their identity, their culture, their very existence was tied to their great city by the sea. To abandon it was to cease to be Carthaginian. Faced with this impossible choice, they chose defiance. The gates of the city were closed. In a furious, desperate effort, the entire population turned to the war effort. Women cut off their hair to be braided into ropes for catapults. Public buildings were torn down for timber. Slaves were freed to fight. For 3 years, the city held out against the might of Rome. The final siege was an act of methodical, merciless brutality. The Roman command was given to Scipio Africanus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, the victor of Zama. He was a skilled and ruthless general. He blockaded the city's harbor, cutting off all supplies. Starvation and disease began to ravage the defenders. Finally, in the spring of 146 BC, the legions breached the walls. What followed was not a battle, but a week-long orgy of destruction. The fighting was street to street, house to house. The Roman soldiers, given license to kill and plunder, showed no mercy. They slaughtered men, women, and children indiscriminately. The remaining 50,000 inhabitants, out of a pre-siege population of perhaps 500,000, were sold into slavery. The city that had stood for 7 centuries was reduced to a smoking, corpse-filled ruin. It is said that Scipio Africanus, as he watched the flames consume the magnificent city, wept. He was not weeping for Carthage, but for the cyclical nature of history. He quoted a line from Homer's Iliad about the fall of Troy, reportedly saying to the historian Polybius beside him, "A glorious moment, but I am seized with fear and foreboding that someday the same fate will befall my own city." He saw in the death of Rome's greatest rival a dark premonition of Rome's own eventual end. After the city was thoroughly looted and burned, the Roman Senate decreed that what remained should be utterly demolished. Every last stone was to be pulled down. A curse was placed upon the site, forbidding anyone from ever living there again. According to legend, the Romans then plowed the fields where the city once stood and sowed them with salt, a symbolic act to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again, that the memory of Carthage would be erased from the earth. The destruction of Carthage was more than the end of a war, it was a profound statement. It signaled a change in the Roman character. They were no longer just the defenders of a republic, they were the ruthless masters of an empire. The Punic Wars, spanning more than a century, had been the crucible that forged this new identity. They had entered the First War as a regional Italian power and emerged from the Third as the unquestioned superpower of the Mediterranean. The lessons Rome learned were harsh and enduring. They learned the importance of sea power, the necessity of absolute commitment to war, and the brutal calculus of imperial security. They had faced an enemy in Hannibal who had brought them to the very brink of annihilation, and their response was to ensure that no such threat could ever rise again. The total destruction of their rival became a template for dealing with future existential threats. The legacy of Carthage became a ghost in the Roman machine. Its language, its religion, its culture, all but wiped out. What we know of Carthage today is almost entirely written by its enemies, the Romans. It is a history told by the victors, a tale of a treacherous, child-sacrificing merchant empire that deserved its fate. The true, complex nature of Carthaginian society is lost to us, buried under the rubble and salt of Roman vengeance. Yet the specter of Hannibal lingered. He became the archetypal enemy, the boogeyman of Roman history. His genius was grudgingly admired, his audacity studied by Roman generals for centuries. He had done the impossible, he had made Rome bleed, he had made Rome fear. And in doing so, he had inadvertently forced Rome to become stronger, more ruthless, and more determined than ever before. He had set them on the path to empire. The story of the Punic Wars is a dark mirror reflecting the birth of a superpower. It is a tale of two mighty civilizations locked in a struggle for existence, a conflict that could only end with the complete obliteration of one. It demonstrates how fear, once it takes root in the heart of a nation, can curdle into a hatred that demands not just victory, but total erasure of the enemy. The Mediterranean Sea, once a contested space, was now truly Mare Nostrum, our sea. From the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of Asia Minor, all bowed to the eagle standard of the legions. The wealth of the conquered world flowed into Rome, transforming its society, corrupting its politics, and ultimately, sowing the seeds of the Republic's own demise and its transformation into an empire ruled by emperors. The fall of Carthage was not just the end of a city, it was the end of a world of possibilities. It was the moment the multipolar world of the ancient Mediterranean died, and the unipolar age of Rome was born. For the next 500 years, one city's laws, one city's language, and one city's armies would dominate the known world, a reality made possible by the ashes of its greatest rival. We stand on the ruins of Carthage today and can almost hear the echoes of the screams, the clash of steel, the roar of the flames. We can feel the weight of a history that was deliberately and systematically erased. It is a silent testament to the fact that power is not just about who wins the battle, but about who gets to write the story afterward. The story of Rome and Carthage is a chilling reminder that civilizations are not eternal. They rise and fall on the decisions of individuals, the fortunes of war, and the long, unforgiving memory of fear and hatred. Scipio's tears were prophetic. All empires, no matter how powerful, eventually face their own Zama, their own final, desperate siege. The world we inhabit today was profoundly shaped by the outcome of this ancient struggle. The languages we speak, the laws we follow, the very political structures of the West all bear the imprint of Roman victory. The conflict was a hinge point in history, a moment where the future pivoted violently. The dust that settled over the salted fields of Carthage was the foundation upon which the Roman Empire, and in turn, much of Western civilization, was built.